What is this report all about? What data is it pulling from? And what problem is it trying to solve for security leaders?
So Akamai is protecting a number of Fortune 1000 companies across the globe, banks and healthcare and commerce and all the different industries. And so what we wanted to do is we put out this SOTI security research report to share our insights. And so quite honestly, we focus on those things we protect. We have our WAF, so we protect, the applications you out there, our API security, our AI firewall, our DDoS protection, and our segmentation. And so what you're going to hear us talk about is those threats that we have data on. And so within this, we've also added some insights from our annual survey on APIs. Things like, 87% of organizations responded that they've had an API security incident in 2025. And so all this data is great insight as you say, I'm reviewing my program. How many API incidents have I had? How do I compare to the industry? Whenever I go talk to the board, they want to know, how do I compare with industry? How do I compare globally? How are we performing? So those are some of the kind of things that we hope to share through this report.
Let's look at the data and compare it with last year. What were the critical findings or trends that stood out to you, your team? What shifted most compared to last year or prior years?
So I'm going to cover kind of the statistics for each one of those categories. So jump in if you have a question as I go through these. But really the first is across, that edge protection. Companies are investing heavily in APIs, that system to system application interface, and to AI. And when I say AI here, I generally mean Gen AI and the specific subcategory of large language models. And so as you're putting these out there and you're investing more money and they're becoming more revenue focused, you're seeing the threat follow. And so we saw the number of API attacks rise by 113% over the last year. Typically comparing that to just, attacking your web pages or your web application, that only grew 73% over the last 2 years. So you can see where the threat is focusing. Next is around DDoS. DDoS is distributed denial of service attacks have been around forever. And every year I'm still continue to be surprised by how they innovate, how they develop, how they change. This is another one where we've seen record-setting surges, and this is up by 104%. Now, I think this is driven by two things. The first is technical capabilities around Turbo Mirai. So if you remember Mirai back in the day, it was these large bots or these large networks made out of IoT, Internet of Things devices. Well, now you see things like Kimwolf coming out who have taken that initial capability and really cranked it up. And so now you're seeing, an order of magnitude larger attacks. The second factor around DDoS is really the geopolitical activity. So, if country A imposes an economic sanction on country B, the response might be denial of service attacks against their banks or against their critical infrastructure. And so this asymmetric kind of attack has really exploded what we've seen in DDoS attacks, both the size and the duration of these attacks. And the last part is kind of interesting, and it's less around statistic, but more around what we see, which is we are getting tremendous benefits from AI, and one of those is vibe coding. And as a CISO, it drives me nuts that people don't have the quality control and security controls in vibe coding I'd like to see. But that aside, you're seeing people with low skills put out pretty sophisticated code or applications. Well, guess who else is using that? The threat. So now we have, criminal groups or cyber groups putting out much more sophisticated tools than they have in the past and moving much faster. So at a really high level, those are probably the key things that I would point out.